In this video, I'm going to show you how to use NSUserDefaults to keep track of a high score for your game, per se. Alright, so I created a project, just a simple iPhone project using Swift, and on the storyboard I created a few outlets and a few IB actions. So I have 4 labels, but these two labels here in particular I made outlets out of, and I'll go split screen so you can kind of see that. So I have one called score that's going to keep track of the score in the game, and then one called high that keeps track of the high score for this particular game. This is just a silly little demo and not a game, but I'm hoping that by that I explained this well enough that you would be able to apply this to any game you would have. For instance, the war game that I created in my last series of tutorials, it could be used in something like that, or really anything that has a score to it. And so we have an IB action that increases the score. This would, kind of simulate you playing a game, and then clicking this button is what happens at the end of the game. And so let's go in and look at the code. Go to the viewcontroller.swift, and so all that's going on in the increase score IB action is we have a class variable called myScore that is an integer equal to 0, and then we're just going to increment it every time that button's clicked and show that to the screen via the score UI label outlet. Okay, and so that's that. We have a simple NSUserDefault variable called simply defaults that is created on this line here, class variable. And what we do is we call this set high score method when we click the end game button. I also, though, have that being called right away when we load the screen so that we can display a high score if there was one from last time we had played the game, right? And so here's the meat of how to use the NSUserDefaults. We created the variable, and what we're going to do is we have this line here that's an if statement. This is a special if statement in Swift that allows you to check to see if NSUserDefault for high score has ever been created before using this app. You can give this any name you want inside the quotes, but just be consistent wherever you are. That way, it's make sure that it's stored, because you can store more than one NSUserDefault if you want. And so this one, though, is for one that we're calling high score. And so we see if it's been saved yet. So the first time through, this is not going to be true, so it's going to go to the else part, right? And we will set the high score as 0. And we're setting as an integer. You can set as a string. There's most types you can set it. You can look at the Apple page for more details on that. But for a high score, typically you're going to want to use an integer. And so we're going to just set it to 0, and we make sure we gave it the name high score, right? And then I reset my score variable so that that's back to 0. So if we play the game again, it starts at 0, right? So let's look at what happens. So we already have a high score set, say it's 0. Then we're going to come in and see what exactly is saved in the high score variable, which we have called name. Okay, the word let means that this is a constant, right? And we're calling it name, and it's going to be whatever was stored. So the first time through, or I guess the second time through, is going to be saved to, it's going to be equal to 0, because that's what we saved down here, right? And this line here is a process of converting it from a object integer to a simple int, right? So that's what happens here. We convert it to that so then we can then use it to compare it to our myScore variable, which is of type int as well. Okay, and so we do that. We go ahead and look and see if the MyScore variable, which is what we scored during the playing of the game, is greater than A, which if we're following along here, that would be equal to 0 at this point. And most likely what we scored is going to be higher than that, so that it would go through here and set that key high score, right? Make sure the spelling and everything is consistent, equal to whatever the MyScore variable is at this point, okay? And then you can just display that to the screen as well so that the high score is shown. If it is not greater, then we just display whatever was saved in A. Make sense? So let's go and run through this so you can kind of see how this works. So I've already played this game once, so it came through and it saved 6 as the high score. But I could hit this, and once I get greater than 6, now we can hit end game, and 7 is there. And let's test that it saved it from session to session, which is really the important part of the NSUserDefault. So if we bring that up, there we go. 7 has been saved. And that should save it for the life of your app, unless you delete the app from your phone. Otherwise, it should save it. So if I increase it and never get to it, hit end game, nothing changed. 7 is the variable that was saved, right? And so that's it. Hopefully that makes sense. Let me know if you have any questions or if I didn't explain anything in enough detail. Thank you.